Welcome to the ThePPod.
Right, welcome back everybody. Welcome to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, as you know, as part of these podcasts, we like to kind of explore different aspects of safeguarding, be that looking at certain agencies and what their role is, but also in terms of some of the difficulties sometimes working with families and some of the strengths of working with them. And today's podcast is really sort of picking up actually around that, about how is it that we engage with families? How do we work with families to support their needs and in order to improve their circumstances? And so on the back of that, I'm really pleased to be joined today in the studio with Jackie Webb, who I'll let Jackie introduce herself in just a second. But I personally feel has been really instrumental in working within Somerset over the last few years, really bringing about sort of new ways to work with families, which I feel have really had quite a kind of revolutionary effect on how we engage, how we support families and how we improve their circumstances and the circumstances for children and young people in Somerset ultimately. So Jackie, welcome along. Thanks for coming along here today.
Thank you for asking me.
So let's get stuck into it. And for anybody sort of listening to this who is kind of wondering what we're going to be talking about, we're going to be talking about motivational interviewing. And if anybody's never heard of that before, could you kind of sum up for us in a nutshell, what is motivational interviewing and what's sort of the principles of it?
Yeah. Well, essentially, a motivational interviewing conversation is a conversation about change. So it's probably a slightly different sort of conversation than people are used to having about change. And it might be where the person on the receiving end may not yet see that they need to change. They might be feeling quite defensive, potentially quite resistant about making that change. Maybe other people see the need for that person to make change, or it might be that the person themselves wants to make a change but is stuck. They don't know how to proceed. So essentially, motivational interviewing is how you engage somebody to have a conversation where change is needed or desired.
And that's key, isn't it, really? And when we're talking about working with families, when we're talking about safeguarding children, like you say, sometimes families are very aware of that need to change and very open to that change. But a lot of the time, actually, either not recognising that need to change or sort of finding some real difficulties in doing so.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what is MI then? How does that work to support that?
Well, one of the things that I think really helps at the start of people learning about MI is to think about what ambivalence is. Ambivalence about making change. And I always start training with that. What is ambivalence? And sometimes people think it's that kind of, you can't really be bothered, don't really care. But actually, it's when somebody has simultaneous conflicting feelings and thoughts about a change. So it could be, I know I ought to stop drinking. My family hates it. Everyone keeps telling me I need to do something about it. And, I know it's affecting me. I know it's affecting my health. But all my friends drink. I don't know how I'd cope if I didn't have a drink. So it's those kind of two teams almost in the person's head, the fors and against. What happens though with helping professionals is potentially unwittingly, they can make it less likely that the person makes the change by taking up the argument for the change. So by kind of trying to persuade or convince or argue for the change, what tends to happen is if anyone's at all ambivalent about it, they feel that imbalance and they want to argue against that side.
Right.
So the point of that is that MI is all about the verbalization of motivation. So as the person hears themselves defending why they don't want to change or why it's too difficult or not the right time or whatever, they convince themselves not to change and they become stuck. Now, what can happen then is you get into a dynamic of the helper upping the ante, persuading even harder, maybe warning, maybe even threatening, well, if you don't do this, we hear sometimes about people kind of stepping things up to a higher level when the person doesn't do what they think they should do. Unfortunately, what can happen then is the person just gets quite entrenched in not changing, which is obviously not going to be helpful for them or potentially their family.
I know. I obviously undertook motivational interview and training with you a number of years ago now, and I certainly saw it as a huge eye opener to my practice. And I think, talking from a personal level at the moment, I think what I recognised is that I tended to go into situations feeling like I should be the expert.
Yeah,
I should have the answers. And I think I saw that pressure probably from other agencies who may have asked for our involvement, probably from myself in terms of feeling like I should know these things, sometimes from families who may have those expectations of, oh, great, somebody's coming in now to sort all this out for me. And I think that was the biggest kind of shift initially for myself, is to go, actually, who is the expert in this relationship?
Absolutely. That's quite a burden for workers as well, isn't it? To feel that they have to have the answers. And we can get ourselves into a bit of a trap of thinking, I just need to ask enough questions. And that kind of suggests to the person on the other end that you're going to come up with an answer. And as you know, Steve, in MI, we move away from that kind of question-answer trap, we call it, of thinking, I've just got to ask the right question and then I'll get the answer here. And often in your head as a worker, you're thinking, I've got no idea what to do here.
Yeah. You're racking your brains.
Yep.
You suggest something,
and you get a yes, but.
Yeah. Or I've tried that, but it didn't really work.
Yeah, that's a good idea, but I tried that, it didn't work. And then we run out of ideas. What do we do then? So you're absolutely right that it's called the expert trap. The other thing is with the expert trap, it doesn't go down too well actually with service users.
No.
People tend to want to be the expert in their own lives. So in MI, we talk about the client or the service user being the expert, but it doesn't mean that the worker doesn't have expertise that might be useful to that person. So we talk about it being a collaboration, and very much MI is about using your expertise if it's needed, but with a light touch and really recognizing that the person who you're working with has probably got really good ideas. They've probably thought of things before, and to bring that into the conversation. Yeah.
So what, in terms of kind of the principles of MI, what sort of underpins it really?
Well, the principles of MI, well, you've already talked about one, is the person is the expert. So letting go, and perhaps we can talk about that a bit more, how hard that is actually, that letting go, that you feel like you've got to demonstrate that you know stuff.
Yep.
And actually there's a big part of the ego that is helpful to let go of when we're practicing MI. And that can be quite a hindrance, actually, that ego. But anyway, but the key principles of motivational interviewing is that the person is autonomous. The fact is we can't make anybody change if they don't want to, aside from water torture, which I don't think you do in Somerset.
It's not generally seen as ethical.
No. So the person is autonomous. So we all want to be captains of our own ship, don't we? And it's like we are alongside that person, almost like, so if they're the captain of their ship, we're alongside standing as second mate, really, and, helping guide the ship. But the person is always in control of themselves. It's never confrontational. We never confront people. We never say, look, if you don't do this, then I'm going to take action for a really good reason, because we know that if we start doing that, the person becomes defensive. And as the person starts to defend the status quo, things as they are, there's that verbalization again. They hear themselves argue against it. You can't do that to me. You can't take my kids away. It's like the talk about the change is gone. It's now about defending themselves. So we never confrontational. Even when it's quite heated, we can have very difficult conversations using MI. We definitely have difficult and very forthright conversations, but they're never confrontational. It's non-judgmental. So as you know, motivational interviewing is drawn from two main approaches. One is person-centered and the other is behavioral. And it's those two kind of streams coming together. So non-judgmental, non-confrontational, the person is the expert. And it's carried out really importantly within an atmosphere that enables the person to be honest and open about their situation.
Mm-hmm.
So we call that the spirit of motivational interviewing.
Yeah. Brilliant. So just as you're talking, I'm just wondering, how would you explain the difference or describe the difference between motivational interviewing and counselling, for example?
Yeah. Well, when I learned motivational interviewing, I was a qualified social worker. I'd not long qualified, but I was also training to be a counsellor at the time. So I've kind of got knowledge of both things. And if I'm honest with you, I felt frustrated with person-centred counselling on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And I quite often train counsellors who are getting a bit frustrated themselves, where they've been working with people sometimes for years and feel like they're going around in circles. The main thing that is different about MI is it's a guiding approach. So we don't just follow wherever the person wants to go. We're thinking about, well, what's my job? What am I paid to do in terms of the change that might be needed, so that I don't just go with, I'm guiding that conversation. So there's a purpose and a direction to an MI conversation.
Just to kind of go back a little bit, how did you get into this into the first place? I mean, you sort of mentioned a little bit about your background there of previously being a social worker and counselling training as well. But sort of, what is your background? What sort of brought you into the world of motivational interviewing?
And it is a world. Yeah. So I qualified as a social worker, but I had always wanted to be a probation officer. And back in the mid-90s, for those of people who remember this, you had to be a social worker to be a probation officer. And that's when I first, I had a 4-day introduction to motivational interviewing in 95.
Okay.
And it was, when you do a training, you think, oh, love it. This is for me. It had all those things I liked about counselling plus.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that we haven't yet talked about is the bit that really excites me on the training, is this attention to the language of change in conversations.
Mm.
What is it that we're listening out for as an MI practitioner? But we'll come on to that. So I, you see how I distract myself. So I learned motivational interviewing in 95, but as people who are, starting to learn MI themselves will probably recognise, you kind of never stop learning and developing. You can go as deep as you like with this subject. I'm always learning new things about it. So I was working in London initially, and then I moved to Dorset in the year 2000. And I was working as a probation officer in a drug and alcohol treatment service. And I think that's where I really got to grips with MI, because NICE guidelines recommend the use of MI with people with drug and alcohol problems. It's where it got its first evidence base, working with people with substance use problems. So it's such a great approach for working with people who are very often ambivalent about giving up substances, because of course there are a lot of benefits to them of using drink or other drugs. So that's where I really used it. I was with the drug and alcohol service for 13 years. Sort of halfway through, I became a social worker, and working a lot, very often, because I was a social worker, with parents of substance using parents. So, and engaging them. There were high stakes for those people, because very often their children were on child protection plans or at risk of that. And they felt that pressure to do something about their substance use. So I really, kind of feel like I learnt a lot in that service.
And I think it's an important point you made there. And like you say, sort of having the origins around the drug and alcohol use. And I think what's important to recognise is often in those situations and lots of other situations, people essentially sort of construct their lives around that. And so actually, if you're coming along saying, that's wrong, that's bad, you just need to stop doing it, actually that's a big ask. Really
huge. And you think about any changes that perhaps you've been ambivalent about making in your own life, whether that be taking more exercise or dieting, or, using your phone less, or turning off your computer a bit earlier in the day, or anything, you could argue one way or the other about, you could convince yourself one way or the other. And that's exactly the same as our service users or clients. And it's recognizing that we want to almost facilitate that person having a conversation with themselves about the change. But of course, we are really carefully listening to that conversation, and we're not giving as great a weight to one side as the other. And that's where this attention to the language of change becomes very, very important.
And that can be hard sometimes as a practitioner when it's really obvious sometimes.
To us.
Actually, you need to stop drinking. You need to stop doing this. This is the damage that it's doing.
Yeah.
But actually that doesn't work, does it?
If it was that easy, then we'd be out of jobs.
That's very true. So you talked about sort of picking up on language that a practitioner may use, but also sort of keying into the language that clients may be working with. Could you give us some examples of that? And you mentioned sort of change talk just now.
Yeah. So change talk is any talk coming from the, let's say, service user or client that is expressing motivation for making the change. Mm-hmm. So let's continue with the person maybe whose family are worried about their alcohol use. In a conversation with that person, you might very well hear both change talk, so motivation for change, and the opposite of that we call sustained talk, reasons desire not to change. So the person might say something like, I know that it's not good for me. I know I shouldn't be drinking as much as I do. But, it's my only vice, and everyone I know drinks as much as I do. I don't see what all the fuss is about. So what we tend to do if we kind of don't know about an approach like motivational interviewing is we start trying to convince the person. But think of all the money you'll save if you stop drinking. Your family would be so pleased with you if you stopped, kind of.
It's bad for your health.
Yeah, you're going to feel so much, you're going to sleep better, you're going to notice, your mood's going to improve because you feel low after you've been drinking, don't you? But unfortunately, if that person is at all ambivalent, which most people are at the start of any kind of treatment, then we maybe unwittingly are getting them to argue for the other side, and actually might make it less likely that they engage or continue with that treatment. Yeah.
So you start hearing more of that sustained talk.
Yeah.
It's like, I get that, but actually I need a bit of time for myself. It's really important.
Exactly.
And all my friends are doing it. And actually it's hard on a Friday.
You go.
When they're going out for a drink and they invite me along, what am I supposed to say?
Exactly.
All those kind of things start coming out more.
Yeah. So we resist that urge. So in motivational interviewing, another thing that we don't do is we don't ask the person, what's getting in the way of you making this change? We might do that very much later in the process. But for the same reasons I've just explained, if you ask somebody, well, what's stopping you from cutting down your drinking? What's the person likely to say?
Well, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's difficult. I've got lots of things going on at the moment. I've got lots of things in my life, and actually I'll get quite stressed about things. Yeah. I have a really busy day at work, and actually it's important to me just to kind of go, do you know what? I'm just going to have a beer and just relax.
There you go. So you've just verbalized and you've heard yourself give all those reasons not to change. And that was on me. I asked you for it because people tend to give you what you ask for. But what I want to do instead is say to you something like, do you mind me asking, Steve, what is it that sort of slightly concerns you about your drinking?
Yeah, and you can see that difference with people, can't you? Yeah. And it encourages you to reflect yourself and I think sometimes it's just saying, well, actually, things could be different. And I enjoy having a drink, but actually I don't like it because when I do, I know the next day, actually I'm in a really bad mood. I tend to shout at my kids, and I hate shouting at my kids because actually I want to be a good dad and all these kind of things.
Yeah, and right there, you're sort of lots of change talk and also something about your values. And that's something we talk a lot about in MI, is this isn't generic reasons for change. This is about the person sitting in front of you and what's likely to motivate them. So I might say something like, so it sounds like being a dad's really important to you and your drinking's getting in the way of that just slightly.
And so I'm just wondering, in terms, I know I talked about the top of this podcast about some of the work you've been doing in Somerset, and I feel you've been sort of integral to the development of motivational interviewing, certainly within children's services, when this was first introduced back at the end of 2019, I think it was. So it's been a number of years now that you've been working in the area. And that was part of a number of initiatives that came in under really kind of mainly sort of embedded into the family safeguarding model within Somerset. And can you just explain some of the work you've been doing with children's services over the last few years? Because it's been quite intensive, isn't it? And there's been a lot of work that's been put in, and sort of maybe good to hear about that work, but also what you've seen coming out from that.
Yeah, I did some ad hoc work with Somerset way before this kind of current intensive sort of period of training. But that was quite a long time ago, and a lot has happened. So Somerset decided to take on the family safeguarding model, which people may or may not be aware was part of a shift in quite a few different local authorities, moving away from adversarial ways of working with parents. Research was showing that just wasn't working because people don't tend to engage when they're feeling, that they're their workers trying to find them out and show them up to be liars and all this kind of thing. And so anyway, that's oversimplifying things a bit. But the way of delivering the family safeguarding model, the approach that underpins that is motivational interviewing. So from 2019, we started rolling out MI training. And really importantly, what Somerset Council did, which was brilliant, was they started with managers right from the director down. And that was my suggestion that they do that, because what very often happens, I've noticed in other places, is they decide to train, if you like, from the floor up. And often it never even gets to managers. And of course, managers play such an important part in the embedding of an approach like motivational interviewing, because it's not just we've not even mentioned the word technique, because it's not a technique. We use techniques within it, but it is about a way of thinking about what you're doing and why you're doing it. And that, of course, can impact how managers are having conversations with staff, just informal conversations, but also supervision. And where you work in authorities where that isn't happening, very often the staff on training will say to me, yes, but my manager tells me I've just got to go out there and tell these clients what to do. And of course, that conflicts with an MI approach. So when you've got consistency of approach right from director level to all members of staff, you've got such a much better chance of it being part of what you just do. Everybody's doing it. Everybody's talking about it. And I think I said to you earlier, I'm just about to do cohort 50 for Somerset. And so we're a long way down the line. And I've really been impressed by the way that Somerset have worked in partnership with me. And we've had a kind of a lovely relationship where we listen to each other, feedback, and we've changed things along the way where it's needed to be changed. Also, what I think works really well in Somerset is we've got a 3-day introduction model where people have 3 or 4 weeks between days 2 and 3 to have a go in practice, and then to come back and talk about what it's like in the real world, not in the training room. And that seems to work really well. Also, Somerset have had a lot of development opportunities for people. I've done quite a few webinars that have been recorded and made available online, and development group. There were a few people identified early on to sort of become almost like MI champions within the service, which worked well. But what we've got now is I'm really keen for Somerset to be self-sufficient going forward. And so we've got some key people in the organisation who are starting to come to the introductory training with almost a different hat on and start to think about how they're going to now take on the development. So once I deliver the training, the development side of things is going to be handled mostly by practice educators within the organisation.
No, it's brilliant. And I say a lot of work's been done, and I'm just wondering for anybody sort of listening to this and thinking, well, that is great. Lots of people within children's social care, children's services have been trained in it. You've talked about drug and alcohol difficulties with parents. Well, actually, I don't work in children's services. I don't work in drug and alcohol services. Is this really relevant for me?
Well, that's one of the things that interests me a lot, is how generalisable MI seems to be across all sorts of different conversations. And what's quite funny is quite often on training, people don't think at all about their clients. They'll be thinking about the conversation with their husband that they're going to have, or their teenage children that evening. Personally, just a note, I don't use it on my family. It's because it's not a therapy, it is a conversation. It can be a conversation in as much time as you've got about any sort of change. I give the example because I know there won't be any vets listening, but say I was talking to somebody who was a vet who was saying, oh, Mrs. Smith's coming in again. She's got an overweight dog. I can't tell you the number of times I've told her she just needs to exercise it more and feed it a bit less. So what's the point of having that same conversation again with Mrs. Smith? She knows all that already, but we get ourselves into these kind of, patterns with people of just having this, it's like deja vu. We're going over it again. What you need to do is you just need to, and then nothing changes. So MI is about having a different conversation in as much time as you've got about a particular change. So if we take that vet scenario, if they wanted to handle it slightly different, which is their choice, of course, they might say to Mrs. Smith, well, thanks for coming in again with Fido, Mrs. Smith. I wonder what you know about the impact of dogs carrying too much weight. So you're asking Mrs. Smith to be the expert on her own dog. Now, how that is done, the tone of voice you use, the genuine curiosity and compassion for Mrs. Smith is absolutely key. Because if it's done in a sarcastic tone, well, what do you know about, they're not going to answer you truthfully and honestly. So, but let's say it is done in that curious, compassionate way. What do you know about the impact of Fido carrying too much weight? Likely as not, Mrs. Smith will be feel able to say, well, I know it's not good for him. He does get out of breath, and I can see he doesn't enjoy his walk as much as he used to. Change talk. So then I might reflect that back. So you're aware that this isn't doing Fido any good, and he doesn't seem to be enjoying his life as much as he used to. That doesn't seem so comfortable for you. Now what we're likely to be doing is tapping into Mrs. Smith's own motivation about making change. So in maybe a couple of minutes, I might be able to say to Mrs. Smith, so if you did decide that you wanted to make some changes to Fido and diet and exercise, what ideas have you got about how you might go about that? So I'm tapping, because she knows already, because I've told her 300 times already.
I'm probably very frustrated by then that she's still not doing it.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
then probably blaming Mrs. Smith.
Absolutely.
Because she's not listening to you.
And the danger is that Mrs. Smith will start avoiding me, not bring the dog in because she's embarrassed about that she hasn't done anything. She might disengage, or she might ask to see a different vet, Yeah,
and I think you're right. And it is completely transferable to any situation, isn't it? Where you're looking at change,
absolutely,
trying to support that change. And I know from previously being a frontline practitioner, from talking to frontline practitioners on a weekly basis, there is often that frustration of I'm doing this, I'm doing that.
I keep telling them,
I'm putting all this effort into it, and actually it's stuck, and it's very frustrating, and can feel very disempowering. I think sometimes for somebody who's working with a family. Where you're trying to get that change, and you've been there 6 months, 8 months, 12 months down the line, and still nothing's moved on. It can be very frustrating, and I think that's the thing for me is just turning that around, turning that perspective around. Say, actually, if we keep doing the same thing in the same way, and we're not getting anywhere, we need to do something different.
It's telling you something.
Absolutely,
yeah. And one of the things that I know people tend to really appreciate when they learn MI is that thing that we call the writing reflex or the fixing reflex that you're kind of, sort of hinting at there a bit, I think, Steve, that, when somebody is talking about a problem, it's very tempting in our minds to solve it for them, to think, especially if we've got a lot of experience in that field, we might say, I know what they could do or should do about this, and to give it to them. But we all know no one likes unsolicited advice, do they? Mm-hmm. So what we can do is, several things can happen. We start prematurely giving advice before the person's ready for it. And then we tend to get that pushed back. Yes, but that won't work because, or I've tried that and it didn't work. Or the person kind of saying that they will do it and not doing it because either they like us and they want to please us, or they think it's just the simplest thing to do to get us off their back if they say they're going to do it. So there are all sorts of dynamics that can be set up so that one of the things that when people first learn MI, because there's quite a lot to it, to learning MI, one of the first things to do is noticing that urge to fix, creeping up inside us and almost like pushing that down, noticing, pushing it down. And instead the key to MI is really good listening, really good attention to listening and managing your urge to fix.
Brilliant. Thank you. This is something we're going to be exploring over a series of podcasts with yourself, Jackie, because we were very keen to look at it and also sort of moving forward. Obviously, you sort of been working with myself to look at how we can kind of roll MI out wider than just children's services. So I just wonder if you want to kind of talk about that at all.
Yeah. So, very excited that to be asked to roll out some MI training for, SSCP. And we're rolling out 1-day training, so people haven't got to commit to a whole 3 days. But to introduce people to kind of the main principles, some of the key skills that are used, some of the techniques as well. A little bit of practice, but not too much. But to make it relevant to people in their own settings. So we've done the first one, and, a lot of teachers and head teachers actually came along to that particular training and, seemed to find it really relevant and seemed to be very keen to practice it once they got back. But again, they were talking about conversations at home to begin with, which, but however you can practice, that doesn't matter.
Yeah, but it becomes sort of quite relatable, doesn't it?
It's relatable, yeah.
And I think that's the thing for me when I did the 3-day training a while back is that I think for a lot of people, I can't say all, but I think for a lot of people, there is a kind of penny drop moment and you suddenly go, actually, I could do it differently here.
I think that's right. I think so many approaches, and there are loads of great approaches. I'm not trying to, disparage other approaches, but they tend to focus on solutions. And if the person is ready for the solution and wants a solution, great. But very often we're working with people who that's not where they're at. And we tend to rush to solution to solve a problem that we perceive where the person actually hasn't decided they want to make the change for sure. And that's the bit in MI that looks really different, which is, and we call it the evoking process, where we're building motivation for why I might want to make the change rather than going straight to how I could do it. Once we've spent enough time on the motivation side of things, why would I even want to do it? The how bit very often takes care of itself or is much, much easier. If we go to the how too soon, we tend to get that pushback, people refuting our suggestions.
Brilliant. So with the 1-day introduction to motivation interviewing, that's open to anybody within Somerset outside of children's services. It's completely free to attend. We're really keen that people do attend this because it does. I've seen it have a profound impact on people's practice. And as part of that, I know, Jackie, we've been working with you to sort of get that legacy from that. Also been working with children's services at the moment to see how we can sort of support practitioners who attend that, sort of moving forward to sort of really embed it into practice. Because like I say, it's a 1 day, it's an introduction, it's an overview rather than, you're not going to come out from it as an expert in MI.
No.
but give you that kind of taster to go, actually, yeah, we can kind of do this. And I know as part of that, you've been really keen to undertake a few more podcasts with us, kind of talking about some of the nuances around it and how it can kind of work.
Yeah, happy to get into some detail. And also there are some free online resources if people are interested. There are a couple of really good websites if people want a bit more information. So first one to mention is www.motivationalinterviewing.org. So that's a free to access website. And the other one is www.mintukandireland.org. So those are two free websites with lots of resources if people want to find out a bit more.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jackie. I'll pop those links in the comments for the podcast as well for anybody who wants to see that. So, Jackie, well, thank you again so much for joining us today. It's been really fascinating to talk to you and start exploring this subject. And I really look forward to sort of you coming back again, and we can start really sort of diving into some of the technicalities of it. And I think the next time we were discussing it, we were talking about maybe talking about why is it so hard to do when it seems so obvious.
Great subject.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Jackie. Great to see you. Take care. As discussed in today's episode with Jackie, the SSCP are now offering free Introduction to Motivational Interviewing training, the dates and details of which can be found on the SSCP training site. Jackie will also be joining us shortly for more episodes, where we'll be discussing some of the details of MI, with our next episode discussion concerning why is MI so hard to do when it seems so obvious. So if today's episode has left you wanting more, don't worry, there is more on its way. As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episodes, please go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at ThePPod@somerset.gov.uk. Once again, I'd like to thank Jackie Webb, Motivational Interviewing Trainer, for taking part in today's podcast, and of course to you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the Training Manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership, and I look forward to you joining us again next time at ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.